How did Winston Churchill become such an iconic British Prime Minister? Winston Churchill was born into privilege. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a politician, and his mother, Lady Randolph, came from a wealthy American family. This meant that from an early age he had access to the best education money could buy. He was educated at home by private tutors until he was 10 years old, at which point he started attending prestigious boarding schools in England. He was brilliant at school, winning prizes for his writing and his speaking. It was clear to all who knew him that he had a bright future ahead of him. At the age of 18, Churchill decided to follow in his father's footsteps and joined the army. He quickly rose through the ranks thanks to his intelligence and his natural leadership ability. But it was during the Second Boer War in South Africa that he really made his name. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Churchill's troops managed to hold out against the Boers. This display of bravery and tenacity won him the respect of his peers and the admiration of the public. When the war ended, he returned to Britain, a hero. But it wasn't all plain sailing. In the years that followed, he held various political positions, but was often overlooked for the top jobs. Many of his colleagues saw him as a bit of a liability, someone who could win elections but couldn't be trusted in government. The defeat of the British Expeditionary Force and our retreat back to Great Britain in WW2 was a turning point. He oversaw the evacuation of Dunkirk, one of the most successful military operations in British history, and he helped to plan and execute the Dyer landings. These were truly pivotal moments in the war, and Churchill's contribution to them can't be overstated. But what about when the war was over? Well, let's talk about that next. After the end of World War II, Churchill stepped down as Prime Minister and returned to the political wilderness. The country was in a mess. The economy was in ruins, and the people were exhausted. There was also growing discontent in the colonies. The war had cost millions of lives and had left people feeling disillusioned with politics altogether. In this climate, Churchill's old enemies at the Conservative Party were able to make significant inroads. They campaigned on a platform of change and won a landslide victory. Churchill was defeated and once again found himself out of power. But it wasn't for long. In 1951, the Conservatives returned to power with Churchill as Prime Minister. It was a remarkable achievement for a man who had been written off by so many. In fact, it was the beginning of an astonishing second act in Churchill's life. He went on to serve 2 full terms as Prime Minister and is widely regarded as one of the greatest British leaders of the 20th century. So, how did he do it? How did he go from being a backseat politician to being Prime Minister of Great Britain? Well, the answer is a combination of factors. First, there's no doubt that Churchill was a brilliant campaigner. He was able to connect with the public like few politicians today. Even his enemies admired his energy and his commitment. Second, the Conservatives were able to capitalize on the public's desire for change. By the time the war was over, people were tired of the status quo. They wanted something new, and they got it. Finally, though we shouldn't forget the role of luck. After all, when Churchill became Prime Minister in 1940, Britain was on the verge of defeat. If things had gone differently just a few months, Britain could have lost the war and Churchill might have been remembered as a failure. As it was, though he led the country to victory and went down in history as a national hero. Alright, now let's get back to the video. The first thing you'll notice about Churchill is his appearance. He has a very distinctive look with his trademark cigar and his bowler hat. He's also unusually tall for the time period, standing at 6 feet 2. These physical attributes give him an air of authority and power that commands respect. In addition to his imposing physical presence, Churchill also has a commanding voice. His speeches are famous for their passion and conviction. He uses his voice to great effect, often employing dramatic pauses and changes in volume to emphasize his points. All of these factors contribute to the impression of a strong, decisive leader. But Churchill's true power lies in his intellect. He's a brilliant strategist and tactician, able to think several moves ahead of his opponents. This is evident in both his military and political career. For example, in the Battle of France in 1940, Churchill recognized the need to evacuate Dunkirk, even though it would be a difficult and dangerous operation. He knew that the success of the Dunkirk evacuation would allow the British Army to regroup and fight another day. Similarly, Churchill was one of the first advocates of the D-Day landings. He understood that invading Europe was the only way to ultimately defeat Germany. These are just two examples of how Churchill's strategic thinking helped to secure victory for the Allies. In addition to his strategic skills, Churchill was also a master communicator. He was able to articulate the goals of the war in a way that inspired the British people. For example, in his famous speech to the House of Commons on June 4, 1940, Churchill declared, "We shall never surrender." These words became a rallying cry for the nation, and helped to boost morale during some of the darkest days of the war. Similarly, in his Christmas Day address to the nation in 1941, Churchill spoke of the need for the British people to endure the hardships of war in order to achieve ultimate victory. Again, these words were incredibly powerful and helped to galvanize the nation around the war effort. Finally, it's worth noting that Churchill was a tireless worker. He was famous for his ability to work long hours without taking breaks. This was particularly important during World War II when the stakes were so high. Churchill was able to keep up with the demands of the job, because he simply didn't know how to relax. This, too, contributed to his overall effectiveness as Prime Minister. As we can see, Churchill was a man with a unique combination of qualities. His imposing stature, his strategic brilliance, his mastery of communication, and his tireless work ethic all contributed to his effectiveness as Prime Minister. He was truly one of a kind, and is still regarded as one of the greatest British leaders of the 20th century. So what were some of the most important events that happened during Churchill's first term as Prime Minister? Well, first of all, there was the Battle of Britain. This was the conflict between the German Luftwaffe and the Royal Air Force, and it took place between July and October 1940. Outcome of the battle was far from certain, but the Royal Air Force eventually triumphed, thanks to the hard work and bravery of the pilots. This victory was crucial for the Allies because it prevented Germany from gaining air superiority over Britain, and it also marked a turning point in the war. After the battle, Germany's focus shifted to the Soviet Union, which allowed Britain to regroup and launch another important event that occurred during Churchill's first term as Prime Minister was the Blitz. This was a sustained aerial bombing campaign carried out by the German Luftwaffe against Britain. It began in September 1940 and lasted for 9 months. The Blitz was designed to break the British people's morale, but it failed to do so. In fact, it had the opposite effect. The Blitz actually helped to galvanize the nation around the war effort. People came together to help each other and to defend their country, and they drew strength from the courage of those around them. Finally, we should also mention the evacuation of Dunkirk. This was the operation to rescue British soldiers who were trapped in the beaches of Dunkirk, France. More than 350,000 British troops were eventually rescued, which might not seem like much compared to the size of the British Army. But the fact was that every single one of those soldiers could have easily died, so the fact that all of them were brought home safely was a major victory for the Allies. So those are some of the most important events that occurred during Churchill's first term as Prime Minister. It was a time of great challenges and also of great triumphs. Under Churchill's leadership, Britain was able to defeat the Luftwaffe, withstand the Blitz, and evacuate Dunkirk successfully. These were all essential victories that laid the foundation for ultimate victory in World War II. Light clock, and I thank you for watching.